For 11 years I stood the cordon at the Windmere Gate, and in all that time I moved exactly when I was told to and not a breath before. That is the whole of it, if you want the short version of what a guard is. We are taught to be furniture. Handsome furniture, in red wool and a bearskin that sits on the neck like a sleeping dog, but furniture all the same. The crowd looks at you the way they look at the stone lions on the gateposts, as if you are part of the wall. I made my peace with that a long time ago. A man can carry a great deal behind a still face, and most days no one ever learns it is there. I tell you this so that you understand what it meant, the day I stepped off my post. It was Remembrance Day in the Kingdom of Aldermore, the one morning each year when the king himself comes down into the king's court to lay a wreath at the cenotaph, and stand in silence for the men who did not come home. The court is a wide square of pale stone in front of Windmere Palace, and on that day it fills until there is no room to breathe. We of the Windmere Guard form the cordon, a long red line holding the people back from the path the king will walk, and we are told the same thing we are told every year. You do not move. You do not speak. Whatever happens in that crowd, your eyes are forward and your boots are still, because today of all days the discipline is the tribute. To stand like stone for the dead is the highest thing we are asked to do. I believed that. I want you to know I believed it with my whole heart, right up until the moment I did not. The morning was cold and gray, the kind of sky that presses down on a square full of people and makes every cough and shuffle sound louder than it is. I had taken my place at the corner of the cordon nearest the Old West Arch, where the crowd is thinnest because the view is poorest, and I stood there with the rifle at my shoulder and the strap of the bearskin biting under my chin. The band had not yet begun. There was that long, restless hush a crowd makes when it is waiting, 1,000 small movements and no large one. That was when I saw the old man. He came in under the West Arch on his own, with no one beside him, and he came slowly. He was a small man made smaller by age, in a brown coat that had been good once and was now only clean, buttoned to the throat against the cold. He had a cane in his right hand and he leaned on it with his whole weight, and every step looked as though it had been decided on separately, planned and paid for. He was making for the front, toward the path, toward the cenotaph, the way a man crosses a room when the crossing has become the work of an afternoon. I should not have been watching him. My eyes were meant to be forward. But a guard learns to see the whole of his cordon without ever turning his head, and I had seen something on that brown coat that I could not let go of. On his left breast, pinned crooked, was a ribbon. It was faded almost to no color at all, a dull thread of gray and green that most people in that square would not have known from a smudge. I knew it. I had grown up knowing it. It was the ribbon of the 8th line, given to the men who held the passes at Courland through the winter that everyone in Aldermore has heard of, and almost no one remembers rightly. My grandfather wore that ribbon. He died before I was old enough to ask him the questions I now wish I had asked, but my grandmother kept it in a drawer wrapped in paper, and she took it out twice a year and told me what it had cost. Of the men who went up into the Courland passes, she said, fewer than 1 in 10 ever came down. And here, 60 years on, was one of them, crossing the king's court alone with a cane. He reached the rope at the front a little to my right, just where the path runs closest to my corner of the line, and he stopped there, breathing hard, both hands on the cane now. No one made room for him. Why would they? To the people around him, he was only a small old man who had pushed to the front and was blocking the view. I heard a woman behind him murmur something about taking your time, and I saw a boy stare at him the way the young stare at the very old, as at something that has nothing to do with them. Then a man in a dark frock coat came down the inside of the cordon with a list in his hand. I knew him. Deputy Marshal Crewe, who runs the order of the day, who knows where every dignitary sits and where every wreath is stacked, and who measures a morning by whether it ran to the minute. A careful man. Not a cruel one, I will say that for him even now. But careful men on careful mornings see an old soldier in a worn coat, and they do not see the Courland passes. They see a gap in the diagram. "Sir," Crew said, leaning in, his voice low and brisk. "Sir, I'll need you to step back from the rope. The procession comes through here. You'll be more comfortable further along." The old man looked up at him. He did not argue. That was the thing that struck me, standing there with my eyes forward and my face like a wall. He did not argue at all. He simply nodded, the small, obedient nod of a man who has been told to move out of the way many times in his long life, and he gathered himself to step back. But the band had begun. The first low note of the slow march came up off the stone, and the crowd went still all at once, and from the palace steps the colors started forward, the great standards of the realm dipping and lifting as the bearers walked. And the old man stopped where he was, half turned to obey the marshal, caught between going and staying, and I watched the choice happen on his face. He turned back toward the colors, and he tried to lift his hand to salute them. He could not. His arm came up to the height of his chest, and there it stopped and shook, and would go no higher. Whatever it is that age and the years had done to him, he had no more lift than that. He stood with his hand trembling at his breast, trying with everything left in him to bring it to his brow, and it would not come, and his face, when I saw it, was not the face of a small old man in a worn coat. It was the face of a soldier who had marched up into Courland with friends he could still name, and had come down without them, and had carried them quietly for 60 years, and could not now lift his hand to tell them he remembered. I have stood that cordon through a great many mornings. I have had people faint against the rope and children cry, and once a man pretend to collapse for a joke, and I never moved. The rule held me as it was meant to. I want to be honest about what the rule is for. It is so that nothing in the crowd, no accident and no theater, can pull the guard out of true on the one day the dead are owed our stillness. It is a good rule. It is not a small thing to break it. Crew touched the old man's elbow again. "Sir, please," he said, not unkindly, "you really must step back." And the old man's hand was still shaking at his breast, and the colors were passing, and the king himself was now coming down the path not 30 feet away with his head bowed and the wreath in his hands. And I understood, the way you understand a thing all at once and completely, that this man had come to the king's court for the last time, that he had spent himself crossing that square to stand for men no one else in the world still stood for, and that he was about to be moved gently to the back of the crowd, where he would lower his trembling hand, and that would be the whole of it. I do not remember deciding. I have tried since to find the moment of the decision, and there is none. There is only that I came to attention, and I turned from my post, and I marched the 8 paces from the corner of the cordon to where the old man stood at the rope. I heard Crew say my name, low and appalled. I heard the small sound a crowd makes when it does not yet know what it is seeing. I did not look at any of it. I came up square in front of the old soldier of the 8th line, close enough to see the gray stubble he had missed shaving and the wet bright at the corner of his eye, and I brought my heels together hard on the stone, and I gave him the salute his own arm could not give. Slow, full, held. A guard salutes the colors and the king and the dead. We do not salute the man at the rope. There is no protocol in the Windmere Guard for what I did, and there had not been for 100 years. He looked at me, and then he stopped trying to lift his own hand and let it rest at his breast, and he stood as straight as the years would allow him and let me hold the salute for both of us. Whatever I had carried behind my still face for 11 years, I put all of it into the holding. And the slow march stopped. It was the king who stopped it. I learned afterward that he had turned at the sound and had seen, and had simply halted on the path with the wreath in his hands, and the bearers had halted with him, and the whole procession of the realm had come to rest in the middle of the king's court because one guard had left his line. The king looked at the old man for a long moment. Then he did the thing I will carry to my own last morning. He came off the path, the wreath still in his hands, and he crossed to the rope, and he stood before the old soldier of the 8th, and he bowed his head to him. Not the small nod a great man gives a small one. A bow. "You held Courland," the king said. "It was not a question." "The 8th held it, Majesty," the old man said. His voice was thin as paper. I was only there. "Then you will lay this with me," the king said, and he did not wait for an answer. He took the old man's arm, the one that would not lift, and he steadied it, and the two of them walked the path together to the cenotaph, the king matching his stride to a cane, and they laid the wreath, the old hand and the young one on it together. The square was utterly silent. I have never heard so many people make so little sound. There were men in that crowd weeping openly and not ashamed of it, and I will tell you the truth. Behind my still face I was one of them. Crew never said a word to me about the line I broke. When it was over and the court was emptying, he came and stood beside me a moment, looking at the cenotaph, and what he said was, "I had him down as a gap in the diagram." Then he walked away, and I think he carried that the rest of his life, the way I carry the salute. I expected to be brought up for it. A guard who leaves his post on Remembrance Day before the king has broken the first rule we are given. I stood ready for whatever came. What came 3 days later was a single line in a note from the captain of the guard, and it said only this: "A guard is taught never to move. He is not taught why. You learned why. Carry on." The old man of the 8th died that winter. I know because they sent word to the barracks, and a handful of us went, in plain coats, and stood at the back of a small chapel, while a thin number of mourners said goodbye to the last man who had come down from the Courland passes. I did not know him. We had never spoken a word to each other. But when they carried him out, I came to attention at the back of that cold chapel, and I gave him the salute again, the slow one, the full one, the one his arm could never lift. I have thought a great deal since about what discipline is. For 11 years I believed it was the not moving. I believed the whole worth of a guard was in his stillness, and that the man who could stand longest against everything the world threw at him was the truest of us. I do not believe that any longer. Stone can stand. Stillness is the easy half. The discipline is in the knowing, the one time in a long life when honor asks you to leave your line, and the courage to know it is that time and not another. I stood my post for years and moved exactly when I was told. I am prouder of the 8 paces I took when no one told me to than of all the rest of it put together. And if you ask me what a guard is for, after all of that, I will not tell you it is the standing. It is for the one who can no longer lift his hand.